You don't belong at this table, old man. Go eat in the kitchen with the help. That's what my daughter-in-law said to me on Easter Sunday, in the dining room of the house I built with my own 2 hands in 1989. 22 people heard her say it, including my 8-year-old grandson, who was sitting right next to her. I set down the carving knife I'd just used to slice the ham, walked to the front door, and did one thing that ended her marriage. Took her business, and forced her to move out of state by the end of the summer. Before I tell you the rest, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I always like hearing where these stories find folks. And if you've ever been treated like a stranger in your own home by family, this one's for you. My name is Bernard. I'm 67 years old. I worked 38 years as a structural engineer for the Port Authority before I retired in 2019. I have 1 son, and I had 1 wife, who passed in 2017 from ovarian cancer that took her in 9 months. The house is a 4-bedroom colonial on a half-acre in Westfield, New Jersey, 2.5 hours from where my son and his wife had been living in Pittsburgh. When my son called me in the spring of 2022 and said his wife had lost her job, and they were behind on the mortgage, and could they stay with me just for the summer, just until things stabilized, I didn't even think about it. I said yes before he finished the sentence. He's my only child. They had a little boy, my grandson, who was 5 at the time. Of course I said yes. They moved in on June 11th, 2022. I remember the date because it was the same day I was supposed to drive up to my fishing cabin in the Catskills, and I canceled the trip to help them unload. My daughter-in-law walked into my house, looked at the living room my late wife had decorated, and said, "Oh, we're going to have to do something about this." That was the first sentence she said inside my front door. Not thank you, not we appreciate this. Something about that. I let it slide. I'd been a widower for 5 years by then. I figured maybe she was stressed. Maybe Pittsburgh hadn't been kind to her. Maybe she'd grow on me. My son had married her in 2014, and I'd never quite warmed to her. But my wife always told me to give people time. People surprise you, she'd say, so I gave her time. The first month, she rearranged my living room, moved my wife's china cabinet from the dining room into the basement. Said it was outdated. I asked her, gentle as I could, please don't move my wife's things. She rolled her eyes and said her name like it was a punchline, like I was being dramatic. My son was in the garage and didn't hear it. I let it go, because the boy was running through the kitchen laughing, and I didn't want to make a scene. By August, she'd taken over the kitchen entirely. I'd come down for breakfast and she'd say, "We already ate. There's nothing left. You'll have to make your own." In my kitchen. With groceries I had paid for. I started keeping a notepad in the drawer next to my keys, just to track things. Old habit from work. When you can't trust your memory, write it down. I'd write things like 8/14, paid water bill, 182nd month in a row. 8/22, she threw out my coffee maker because it didn't match the new one she ordered with my Amazon account. 9/3 told me to keep the TV down at 7:30 p.m. because the boy was sleeping. I was watching the news at a normal volume in my own family room. October came and my son lost his job too. The tech company he'd been working remotely for downsized. I told him not to worry. Told him to take his time finding the right thing. I had savings. I had the pension. I had the rentals. The house was paid off. I told him family takes care of family. He hugged me in the kitchen and cried a little. He's a good kid. He really is. But he married a woman who saw kindness as weakness, and that's a hard thing for a father to watch. That winter, I paid for everything. Heat, electric, water, internet, groceries for 4 people, gas for both their cars, the boy's preschool tuition because she didn't want him in the public one. I never asked for a dime back. I never even mentioned it. I was glad to do it. My son was looking. He had 3 interviews in November alone. I figured by spring they'd be back on their feet. But here's where I started noticing things. My daughter-in-law wasn't looking for a job. She was building what she called her brand. She'd quit her old job, I learned later, not been laid off. She wanted to be one of those lifestyle people on the internet. She'd film herself in my kitchen, my backyard, my living room, talking about home life and motherhood, like she was the lady of some manor. She bought ring lights and a tripod and a microphone, and put it all on a credit card she'd opened in my name without my permission. I didn't find that out until much later. By Christmas, she told my son they should sell their house in Pittsburgh and just stay with me permanently. Save for a down payment somewhere nicer. Maybe Princeton, she said. He agreed. They listed the house in January 2023, and it sold in February for a small profit, which she immediately spent on a new SUV and what she called wardrobe investments. None of it went into savings. None of it came toward groceries or utilities or anything in my house. I asked my son once, quietly, in the garage where she couldn't hear, what the long-term plan was. He looked at his shoes and said they were figuring it out. He said she was almost monetizing the brand. He said another 6 months. I didn't push him. He was 36 years old, and he looked 60. She'd worn him down. The disrespect built up like silt at the bottom of a riverbed. Slow. Then suddenly, there's no water left. She started introducing me as her father-in-law who lives with us. We. Us. In her social media posts, she'd refer to my house as our home. She moved my late wife's photographs off the mantle and put them in a box in the attic. When I went up there one weekend and brought them back down, she told me they didn't fit the aesthetic. I put them back up anyway. The next day, they were gone again. That was the first time I really got angry. I stood in the kitchen and asked her where my wife's pictures were. She was making a smoothie. Didn't even look at me. Said, "Bernard, this is a shared space now. We need to compromise on the visual." I said her name was on the deed before me. That this was her house too. That those pictures stay up. My daughter-in-law turned off the blender and looked at me with the flattest eyes I have ever seen on another human being. She said, "She's been dead 6 years. It's time to move on." I walked outside and stood in the driveway for 45 minutes. I called my old friend who had been my best man at my wedding and is still my closest buddy in the world. He's a retired probate lawyer, lives 2 blocks over. We play cribbage on Tuesdays. I told him what she said. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Bernard, you need to start protecting yourself. Right now. Before it gets worse." I didn't listen. Not really. I told myself my son needed me. I told myself the boy needed his grandfather. I told myself my wife would have wanted me to be patient. The truth is I was lonely, and they were the only family I had left, and I was scared of losing them. By summer of 2023, it was getting bad. She'd started telling people I was developing dementia. I overheard her on the phone with her sister saying I'd left the stove on twice, which was a lie, and that she was worried about my driving, which was also a lie. I'd been to the doctor in May for my annual physical. My cognition was fine. My doctor told me, off the record, to be careful. He'd seen this pattern before. Adult kids preparing the ground for a power of attorney grab. In August, she suggested I move into the in-law suite above the garage, to give the family more space. I said no. She said it would be temporary. I said no. She didn't talk to me for 2 weeks. My son came to me and asked me to consider it. Said it would help her feel comfortable. Said the boy was getting older and needed his own room. The boy already had his own room. The room she wanted to take was my office, where my wife and I had done our taxes together every spring for 30 years. I said no again, and that's when things got cold. She stopped serving me dinner. If I came to the table, there'd be 3 plates. If I asked, she'd say she didn't know I'd be home, even though I was home every night. She started locking the family room when she filmed her videos and telling me to use the basement. She told the boy not to bother Grandpa, that Grandpa was busy, when I was sitting right there in the recliner reading the paper. The boy stopped coming to me. He'd loved me. He used to climb into my lap every evening to read books. By Halloween of 2023, he'd flinch if I tried to ruffle his hair. That's the thing that nearly broke me. The boy. I called my friend the lawyer the day after Halloween. We sat on his porch and I told him everything. Every entry from my notepad. Every dollar I'd spent. Every timesheet undermined me. He listened the whole way through without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Bernard, what does she think you're worth?" I said I didn't know. We never talked about it. He said, "That's good. Keep it that way. Don't tell her anything." Then he said, "What are you actually worth?" I told him. The house was worth about $900,000. The Catskills cabin and 40 acres around it, around 600. 2 rental duplexes I'd bought in the 90s, paid off, rented out, that brought in steady income and were worth around 800 together. My pension, my 401k, my brokerage account, the life insurance settlement after my wife passed, all in, on paper, I was sitting on a little over $3.5 million. Not rich, not yacht money, but comfortable, more than comfortable. I'd been frugal my whole life, and the engineering work had paid well, and I'd invested early. My friend let out a long breath and said, "Bernard, she's going to come for that. Maybe not directly, but she's going to. You need to make a plan, right now." I didn't tell anybody, not my son, not my daughter-in-law, not my brother in Florida, not my buddies at the diner. I'd never been a flashy man. I drove a 2013 pickup truck and wore the same 5 flannel shirts in rotation. People saw an old widower in a paid-off house and assumed I was getting by on Social Security. That had always suited me fine. My wife and I lived simple because we wanted to leave something to our son, and maybe to a son after him. That had been the whole point. I started preparing in November 2023. Quietly. My friend introduced me to an estate attorney downtown, a sharp woman about 50 years old who specialized in elder protection cases. I went to her office every other Wednesday for 3 months. We rebuilt my whole estate plan from scratch. New trust, new healthcare directive, new power of attorney, with my friend named instead of my son. Every account I had, I moved into protected structures. Every property got retitled. The rental duplexes went into an LLC my daughter-in-law had no way of finding. I changed every password on every account. I bought a small fireproof safe and put my deed and my wife's death certificate and the new estate documents inside. And I bolted it to the floor of my bedroom closet. I also did one more thing. I started saving everything. Every receipt. Every utility bill. Every grocery store ledger. Every email. I had a folder on my computer called Easter because my attorney had told me, offhandedly, that the holidays are when these things blow up. Pick a date and prepare for it, she said. Don't let her pick the date. By March of 2024, my daughter-in-law had decided to host Easter. She invited her parents from Connecticut, her sister and brother-in-law and their 3 kids, 2 of her brand collaborator friends and their husbands, my son's college roommate and his fiancée, and a couple of neighbors she was trying to impress. 22 people total. In my house. She didn't ask me. She told me 2 weeks out that I should plan to be helpful, but not in the way. Those were her exact words. Helpful, but not in the way. I said, sure. I smiled. I said I'd handle the ham and the carving and stay out of her hair otherwise. She seemed relieved. She probably thought I'd been broken in. Easter Sunday, March 31st, 2024. I got up at 5 in the morning and started the ham. 13 pounds, brown sugar glaze, pineapple, the way my wife taught me. I mashed the potatoes, I made the gravy. I set the dining room table for 22 with my wife's good china, the set she'd inherited from her grandmother. I was tired by noon, but in a good mood. The boy had come down to the kitchen at 7 and helped me peel potatoes. He was almost 8. He'd asked me if Grandma knew how to make this ham too. I said she taught me. He said he wished he'd met her. I had to turn around to the sink so he wouldn't see my face. Guests started arriving at 1. Her parents I'd met before, decent people, a little oblivious. Her sister's family I'd met once, the collaborators I'd never met. My son's roommate I'd known for 15 years and liked. The neighbors I waved to on trash days. The trouble started right away. My daughter-in-law was in full performance mode. She'd hired a photographer for the afternoon. A photographer for Easter dinner at her father-in-law's house. She'd put on a cream-colored dress and done her hair in some elaborate way, and she was floating around saying things like, "Welcome to our home. So glad you could come. We just love hosting." Like she was on a magazine cover. I stayed in the kitchen mostly, carving the ham, plating the sides. The boy kept running back to me to grab cookies off the counter. Around 2:30, she came in and told me to plate everything for the buffet style she'd set up in the dining room. I did. 22 plates of food, set out beautifully, my wife's china gleaming under the chandelier I'd installed in 1991. Then she announced dinner. Everyone moved into the dining room. I set down a carving knife, washed my hands at the kitchen sink, dried them, and walked through the swinging door toward the table, where my own seat at the head was waiting. Or so I thought. My usual chair was gone, replaced by her father. I stood there for a second, confused. Looked around. Every seat was taken. My son was at the far end. The boy was next to his mother. My daughter-in-law was at the head, pouring wine. The room was loud and warm, and the smell of the ham was hanging in the air. I cleared my throat, said, "Looks like I'm short a seat." The room quieted a little, not all the way. Conversations dimmed. My daughter-in-law looked up from the wine bottle, smiled at me with that flat-eyed smile, and said, "Oh, Bernard, this is a grown-up's dinner. We thought you'd be more comfortable eating in the kitchen. There's a plate for you in there." I felt my chest tighten. I said, "This is my house." She laughed, like I'd told a small joke. She said, "You don't belong at this table, old man. Go eat in the kitchen with the help." There is no help. There was no one in the kitchen. It was just me. The room went dead silent. 22 people watching. Her father started to say something, but she shot him a look and he stopped. Her mother stared into her wineglass. My son looked at his lap. The boy looked at me with eyes that were already shining. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds. Long 10 seconds. I felt every year of my life sitting on my shoulders. I thought about my wife and what she'd say. I thought about the boy. I thought about the house I'd built. I thought about the Easter I came home from the hospital with my son in 1986, when my wife and I sat at this same table, just the three of us, and ate ham off paper plates because the dishwasher was broken and we couldn't afford to fix it yet. Then I said, very quietly, "I'll get the door." She blinked, said, "What?" I turned around, walked through the kitchen, picked up my phone off the counter, walked to the front entry, opened my front door, and dialed a number I'd memorized 2 months earlier. I called my attorney. She answered on the second ring. It was Easter Sunday afternoon. I told her when we set this up that if I called her on a holiday, it meant the day had come. She said, "Are you ready?" I said, "Yes." I said, "I want all of it. Today. Right now." She said, "Give me 90 minutes. I hung up. Walked back into the dining room. Stood at the open archway. 22 faces turned toward me. My daughter-in-law looked at me with her wineglass halfway to her lips and said, "Bernard, what are you doing?" I said, "I want everyone in this house who is not me to gather your things and leave. Right now. If you are a guest, please gather your coats and go home. If you live here, you have until the police arrive to pack what you can carry." She laughed again, but it cracked. She said, "You cannot be serious." I said, "This house is mine. It has always been mine. I am the sole owner. There is no lease, no tenancy. I am revoking my permission for you to be here. You have approximately 45 minutes before officers arrive to enforce that." The whole room moved at once. Her sister stood up. Her father stood up. The neighbors started backing toward the door, like the room was on fire. My son's roommate gathered his fiancée by the elbow and apologized to me as he walked past. He was the only one of them who said anything to me. "Sorry, Bernard." He said it twice. Real quiet. My daughter-in-law went red, then white, then red again. She said, "You can't kick us out. We live here. We have rights. This is our home." I said, "No, ma'am. This is my home. You have been a guest. The guest day is over." My son finally looked up. He said, "Dad, please. Please don't do this in front of everybody." I said, "Son, I love you. I do. But she just told me to eat in the kitchen with help that doesn't exist. In your mother's dining room. On your mother's china." After 3 years of me paying every bill and getting smaller in my own life, I am done. I need you to pack a bag and decide what you're doing. He started crying. The boy was already crying. I knelt down and looked at the boy and told him Grandpa loved him very much and that this wasn't his fault and that I would see him soon. The boy reached for me and his mother grabbed his arm and pulled him back, hard. He yelped. That sound, the sound of my grandson yelping because his mother yanked him away from me, has not left me. It will never leave me. The guests all left within 15 minutes. None of them stayed to defend her, not even her own parents, who left the house with their heads down, her father pausing at the door to say, "Bernard, I am so sorry." He meant it. I nodded. The police arrived at 4:11 that afternoon. 2 officers, a young one and an older one. I'd called the local department from my back porch after the guests left and asked them to come for a civil standby. They were polite. I showed them the deed. I showed them the utility bills in my name. I showed them my driver's license matching the address. I told them my son and daughter-in-law had been staying as guests for nearly 3 years and refused to leave. The officers walked into the dining room. My daughter-in-law was on the phone with someone screaming. My son was sitting on the floor of the staircase with his head in his hands. The boy was nowhere to be seen, and for a second I panicked, but then I heard him crying upstairs in his room. The older officer was very kind. He explained to my daughter-in-law that without a lease, without rental receipts, without any documentation of tenancy, she had no claim to the home. He told her she had the rest of the day to gather essential belongings and leave the premises, and that any remaining items could be retrieved later through a civil arrangement. She tried to argue. She tried to say she was a co-resident and had rights. The older officer just shook his head slowly and said, "Ma'am, that's not how that works." They were gone by 9 that night. My son hugged me before he left. He was shaking. I told him I loved him, and that when he was ready to talk, alone, without her, I would be here. He nodded and walked out with 2 duffel bags. The boy I didn't see again that night. She put him in the car early and refused to let him say goodbye. I sat in the dining room around 10 o'clock. Just me. The ham still on the table, cold, half-carved. 22 plates of untouched food. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and ate a slice of ham standing up at the kitchen counter, the way my wife and I used to do at midnight when the house was finally quiet. I cried for about an hour. Then I called my friend, the lawyer, and he came over, and we sat on the back porch in the cold spring air, and he didn't say much. He just sat with me. That's what real friends do. The next morning, I changed every lock in the house. I called a security company and had cameras installed by Wednesday. I called my attorney's office on Tuesday and started the next phase. That phase had 2 parts. The first was a civil suit for the money I'd spent on them. I documented every bill, every grocery run, every credit card charge for nearly 3 years. The total, when my attorney finished tabulating it, came to $108,000 in direct support, plus the unauthorized credit card she'd opened in my name, which had run up another $19,000, which I'd already disputed and gotten cleared, but which represented identity theft. My attorney filed in Union County Superior Court within 10 days. The second part was the brand. My daughter-in-law had been building her social media business for 2 years, mostly filmed in my house. Every shot, every video, every product placement, every sponsored post had been recorded inside my home, using my furnishings, in many cases featuring my late wife's belongings as background props. She'd never asked permission. She never paid me a licensing fee. She'd been earning income off my property without consent. My attorneys sent a cease and desist to every brand she had partnerships with documentation showing the property was mine and she'd had no authorization to commercially use it. Within a week, 4 of her 6 sponsorships dropped her. She lost her only steady income. The other 2 paused her account pending review, then quietly dropped her too. The criminal piece came when the bank pulled the records on the credit card she'd opened in my name. Identity fraud is a federal matter. I didn't pursue charges because my son begged me not to, and I'm a soft man at the end of the day. But I had the documentation. My attorney made sure she knew I had it. That was leverage I held in reserve. She filed a countersuit in May claiming I'd verbally promised her lifetime residency. There were no witnesses, no documents, no texts, no emails. Her case fell apart at the first hearing. The judge, a woman in her 50s with very tired eyes, looked at her attorney and asked if there was any documentary evidence at all. The attorney said no. The judge dismissed it in under 20 minutes. My case against her went to trial in September. By then, she was living in a 1-bedroom rental in Elizabeth with my son and the boy. My son had taken a job at a logistics company in Newark for $48,000 a year. She had nothing coming in. The judge awarded me the full $108,000 plus court costs, joint and several liability. They'd be paying it back at $500 a month from each of them for years. The judge looked at her over her glasses and said, "You took advantage of an elderly man who opened his home to you. Take this judgment as a lesson." By the end of summer 2024, she'd moved back to Connecticut to live with her parents. My son and the boy stayed in Elizabeth. He filed for divorce in October. It finalized in February of this year. He has joint custody now and brings the boy to see me every other weekend. The boy is 9. He sleeps in the guest room, the one his mother once tried to take from me. He helps me cook ham at every holiday. He learned how to make my wife's stuffing last Thanksgiving. He calls me Pop now, which is what I called my own father. We're slow about it. He had 3 years of hearing terrible things about me, and trust takes time to come back. But he comes back to me a little more each visit. My son and I are working on it. He came over alone in June of last year, sat at the kitchen table, and apologized for 2.5 hours. He cried. He said he'd known what she was doing, and he'd been too scared to stop her. And that's the truth. I forgave him because he's my son and because he showed up. But I also told him there were rules now. He pays his own way. He doesn't ask me for money. He doesn't bring anyone into my house without asking. And he never, ever lets anyone speak to me the way she did, or that person doesn't come back. He agreed to all of it. He's been good about it. She stopped paying her share of the judgment after 4 months. My attorney has a wage garnishment on her now through her parents' state. She's working as a receptionist somewhere, last I heard. The brand is gone. The sponsorships are gone. The lifestyle is gone. She had to file personal bankruptcy in November of last year, but the judgment against her can't be discharged, because the court found she'd acted in bad faith. So she'll be paying me back until she's 70. I don't think about her much anymore. I think about my wife. I think about the boy. I think about my friend who saved my life by telling me to start preparing 2 years before I was ready to admit I needed to. And I think about that moment in the kitchen on Easter morning, when the boy asked if his grandmother knew how to make ham. Because that was the moment, looking back, that I knew I was going to do what I did. I just didn't know it yet. If you've got somebody in your life trying to make you small in your own home, hear me on this. You don't have to scream. You don't have to fight. You don't have to hate them. You just have to stop being available for it. Quietly, patiently. Document everything. Keep your own counsel. Wait for the right moment. And when it comes, open the door. That's the whole story. Thanks for listening. If it meant something to you, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments what you would have done. I read every one. I sat on my back porch the morning after Easter and watched the sun come up over the same trees my wife and I planted in 1991. The house was quiet for the first time in nearly 3 years. I had a cup of coffee in my hand and a soreness in my chest that wasn't grief exactly. It was something more like waking up. I think a lot about cause and effect now, in a way I didn't when I was younger. When my daughter-in-law walked into my house in June of 2022 and said something about the place needing to change, that was a small thing. A sentence. I let it go, but every time you let something go, you teach the person across from you what you'll accept. I taught her, over almost 1,000 days, that I would accept being smaller. So she made me smaller. That's not her fault entirely. That's mine too. The first lesson I had to learn, sitting on that porch, was that kindness without limits isn't kindness. It's an invitation. The second thing I learned is that strength doesn't have to be loud. For most of my life, I thought a man stood up for himself by raising his voice or putting a fist on the table. My father was that kind of man. My uncles were. I grew up around it. But what I did at Easter, the thing that actually changed our lives, I did quietly. I made one phone call. I documented for 3 years. I prepared without telling a soul. The loudest thing in my house that afternoon was the silence after I opened the front door. There's a kind of dignity and patience that no shouting match can match. I wish I'd known that at 30. I want to say something to anybody listening who's where I was 2 years ago. You are not crazy. You are not too sensitive. If you have to make yourself small in your own home so somebody else can feel big, something is broken, and that isn't you. The hardest part isn't the eviction. It isn't the lawsuit. It isn't even the police standing in your dining room. The hardest part is letting yourself believe you deserve better, after years of being told you don't. That's the work. That's the real work. My grandson is 9 now. Last weekend he asked me, while we were peeling apples for a pie, why I waited so long to do what I did. I told him the honest answer. I told him I was scared and lonely, and I loved his daddy, and I didn't want to lose any of them. I told him sometimes the bravest thing isn't moving fast. Sometimes it's waiting until you can move once and not have to move again. He thought about that for a while. Then he asked if we could put cinnamon in the pie, and we did. That's what I've got left after all of it. A boy who trusts me again. A son who's slowly becoming the man I raised. A house that's mine, fully and quietly, with my wife's china back on the shelf and her photographs back on the mantel, and the knowledge, late but earned, that I was always allowed to choose myself. I just had to remember how.